doors to these universities and much, much more. So what do you need to do? Go apply. Where do you go apply? LX Pathways through bit.ly, that is bit.ly/LX Pathway SFM. Deadline April 21st. Go apply.
For you, there's no deadline. For you will spend. spend it, and even earn more. So why apply a deadline?
Well, look at it this way. Let's do a little math, shall we?
Okay.
Simple maths. Addition.
Yes.
I&M Bank on the Go platform equals World Credit MasterCard.
Okay.
By I&M. Equals Milele points.
Okay.
Equals spending. Equals more Milele points. Equals more spending equals more Milele points. If you happen to be the 20th person who has registered on the I&M Bank on the Go platform, you will receive 50,000 of the said Milele points. Now, these Milele points will be used in the same way as you would use the card.
Fantastic.
You can buy, and then you can buy. What can you buy? Same things you always buy, whether you need it for fuel, whether you need it for food, whether you need a ticket to fly, it is up to you.
Get the card, spend, earn, spend some more.
Earn some more.
And earn some more.
Yes.
Doesn't get better than that. Absolutely sharing more information with you as we go along on these things. All right. So we're getting into a conversation this morning, long time coming, with Advocate Charles Kanjama, who is in the hot seat of the Situation Room this morning. Wakili, good morning.
Good morning to you.
How are you doing?
Very well.
We say finally. When you've chased and tried, and then it finally happens, you use the word finally. So very happy to have you in the hot seat of the Situation Room.
I'm also happy to be here, and thank you for inviting me.
Oh, good. I'm glad that you honored the invitation. And no sooner than had you got here than we put you to work, because CT, as you may know, goes around the African continent every week. Don't ask me how I keep saying. We'll just take it as it goes, right? So he comes back from a different African country with a basket full of proverbs. He's going to share that country and the proverb, and then we will ask you how you would interpret that. Is that all right?
That's okay.
Okay.
We are in the Comoros. It's an archipelago in the Indian Ocean. The largest of the islands that form this archipelago is one called Moroni. Moroni, not Muhoroni where I come from. Yes. Moroni. Though some people refer to Muhoroni as Moroni.
Yeah.
Yes, and Moroni also happens to be the capital of this delightful country. Now, the proverb is actually a very simple one, straightforward and easy to interpret. Where there are riches, thieves abound. If the riches are large, the thieves are as big.
I think where there is abundance, you always need to protect your abundance. There's always a threat to abundance. Prosperity is always surrounded by threats that can diminish the prosperity. And I think riches is not only material riches, but any kind of prosperity. You always need to preserve and protect it.
You absolutely correct. And you put it well. You've responded and even contextualized.
It is great. So you do need to protect it.
Yes.
There is an abundance. There is, there's wealth. There's prosperity. There's something you need to protect it. There's sacredness that you then must protect because somebody's going to want to take it. Now, it's along those lines, I think, that we even have the conversation that we have this morning, because we're looking at the IEBC, the constitution of the same. We're looking at timelines, and we're looking at, thresholds through which we then should not play outside of. And we're looking at it all from a legal point of view. And why we do that is because there needs to be an understanding across board of, essentially what we're being fed.
Yeah.
There's a process that seems to be taking place over there. There's a selection of some people. It's happening over there. When they're done, they shall present them to you and let you know that this is what we've done and this is how we're going to go ahead. But then there's also the side of citizen-centered governance where you say, no, we need to be aware of everything that is happening and understand the process so that when they are presented, then we can actually say, fine, we understand and accept, or no, we don't understand or we don't accept. Now, essentially, what is happening with the IEBC? Let's go back before this election process, whereby after 2022, the IEBC, for all intents and purposes of functionality,
Yes.
for some things then did not exist.
Exactly.
Because now no commissioners, no chair, the office continued to run. But what happened along the line is that you have some people, by virtue of natural occurrences like death or because of appointments, they had to relinquish their seats.
Yeah.
The law says that within 90 days you should have a by-election. But
Yes.
some things we were not able to do because, again, no functioning IEBC.
Yeah.
So those processes and their vacancies then became unconstitutional. But we still continue to operate as though nothing happened.
Yes.
Is that okay?
Definitely not. I think the country has witnessed a period of failure of our constitutional processes. This has taken close to 2 years. And unfortunately, each of the three arms of government is partly to blame. For more than a year, there was a case in court, or more than one case in court, that stopped certain constitutional processes as people were contesting the composition of the selection panel. And for some period in time, there was a stalemate in parliament because the opposition, or at least Azimio, which was the opposition coalition, was again contesting the makeup of the first schedule of the IEBC Act, which of course had been a compromise between Uhuru Kenyatta and Raila Odinga before the last elections, but it did not seem appropriate after the elections. And then, of course, the executive also failed to do a part of its job. It is required that when a vacancy is about to arise in a composition of IEBC, that a gazette notice is issued to declare the vacancy 6 months before the vacancy arises, when it is a vacancy that can be anticipated because of end of term. And if it is by resignation, as soon as possible. And it's meant to trigger a process, and that process involves appointment of a selection panel. We know that the selection panel was first appointed more than a year ago. And then there was a stalemate because of NADCO, the National Dialogue process that involved the president and the former prime minister and their lieutenants.
Yeah.
So again, there was a stalemate. And so what happened is that IBC has been without a commission for more than 12 months. And the Supreme Court has been very clear that a constitutional commission like IEBC cannot undertake any substantive action that requires policy decision in the absence of commissioners. So they have the entire secretariat, they have the CEO who runs the secretariat, but they cannot undertake actions like elections, like boundaries delimitation. This was meant to be done last year. 2024 was the deadline for boundaries delimitation. It was not done. Of course, by-elections were not done. Any other policy actions require IEBC. In fact, there was only one major decision of IEBC that somehow escaped this restriction of the Supreme Court, which was the decision that the former Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua should be removed, and that the incoming, the one who came in, was qualified to be a Deputy President. That one somehow sneaked through the restriction of the court that any important decision requires commissioners. So then once the selection panel now is in place, because the court has done its bit, the High Court, it has gone to the Court of Appeal, because Parliament has done its bit, they have nominated a representative of the majority coalition, the minority coalition, the political parties liaison committee has also done its bit, it nominated its people, the Law Society, Institute of Certified Public Accountants, they all nominated their people, and the executive also did its bit. Now we are going through the selection panel process. And what you expect will come out of this process is that the selection panel will nominate 2 persons, possibly a man and a woman, for consideration as the chair of IEBC.
By the president?
By the president.
Okay.
And they'll also nominate 9 persons using the gender ratio of not more than 2/3 of either gender, for again consideration by the president for member of the IEBC. And the president will have 7 days from the 2 names he gets for a chair to pick one of the 2. And for the 9 names he gets for member to pick 6 of them. That one person that the president picks for chair and the 6 people that he picks for a member of IEBC will then be forwarded to Parliament. And Parliament will then vet them and approve them or reject them as the case may be. And once that is done, then you will have an IEBC fully constituted. Once the IEBC is constituted, they have a lot on their plate, agenda that is waiting for them. The entry includes by-elections that are pending for constituency and ward level, the seats that are vacant. It also includes boundary delimitation. And for boundary delimitation, they need to prepare a report based on the constitutional principles that are found in Article 89 of the Constitution, the most significant of which is the population formula.
Right.
Because there are other criteria to consider, but there is a population formula that says you cannot have less than this or more than this in terms of proportionality of the population. And based on that, some counties will get less constituencies and less wards, and some will get more constituencies and wards. The new constituencies and wards have to be given names. That report will be presented to Parliament, and Parliament will debate, can amend it, pass it, and so on. So that is a lot of the work that needs to be done. And of course, is a process of preparation for the next elections, which includes review of the laws and the electoral policies, the regulations, possible amendments of any area where there has been an issue.
Right.
There are issues of procurement, the biometric voter registration, the electronic voter identification, all those kits. After 5 years or 10 years of usage, technology changes.
Yes.
You need to procure new ones. Some of them are out of form. There is a continuous voter registration, including a major voter registration exercise. Because you see, the continuing voter registration happens at the constituency headquarters. Very few people are aware of it. So you need the major exercise where they get many people appointed on temporary terms.
Yeah.
They go to every constituency and ward. They say for 1 month, we're encouraging people to come and register or to change their place of voting. So there's a lot of work that they need to do, all within the next 12 to 18 months.
There's a lot of work that needs to be done. I mean, if budgeting alone is ridiculously crazy when you now
Yes.
you think of the things that need to be done towards the next election. And it's interesting that you mentioned continuous voter registration, and these are some of the functionalities that we talk about that continue to happen even from the headquarters of the IEBC, unbeknownst to so many people.
Yes.
But somehow, still, we seem to find room for the subjective focus on whether the decisions then made as to who will be the commissioners and the chairperson of the IEBC have any kind of political tint to it. We still seem to find the room to discuss that. We've seen, as of yesterday, already there is a suggestion that folks are already not happy with the partisanship, essentially, that could play out in this process. From your point of view, from a legal, from a constitutional point of view, is that something to worry about?
Definitely, IEBC has to be involved in the task of public participation, stakeholder engagement, and confidence building. And the most important stakeholders for IEBC is actually political parties. And we know they are very fractious. Even within the political parties themselves, they tend to have issues of indiscipline, disagreement. There's a social dimension that may not appear when you read the pages of the constitution or the law. But good commissioners of IEBC have to be aware of this. They have to be strictly impartial. At the same time, they have to listen to all the people who have concerns. And they need to demonstrate an ability to engage with the concerns of the political players. Of course, every voter is a stakeholder for IEBC. That is why it is one of the most important constitutional commissions in Kenya. But I would not dismiss any concerns that are made by political players, because these political players are the people who make or break elections. You see, we have delayed in setting up an IEBC for more than 12 months. Why? Because of concerns of people from Azimio coalition. And from Wiper, they went to court challenging the person in the selection panel from political parties liaison committee, saying Wiper should have had
Somebody
there. So this is not in the text of the law or the constitution. The process seemed to be going okay, but you can see it got stalled because of social or other political perspectives. So it's very important that even the appearance of integrity, of fairness and competence is there. And that is something that the new commissioners will have to engage in, and even the selection panel during the current process.
How will they be able to do that? We spoke about this a few minutes, just, earlier on.
Yes.
How will they be able to do that? Because in as much as we talk about the law and constitutionalism, perception and optics play a huge role in this whole process.
Yes.
So if folks going in already have the perception that things were done in a partisan way, or that there is unfairness in terms of selection, your guess is as good as mine in terms of what will happen later on down the road when an election actually happens. And somebody will say, well, we told you in 2025 that
Yes.
things already were not fair. And
Yes.
here we are with the result where you had already injected unfairness. Are we not hurtling towards that direction?
That danger is there. And I don't think you'll ever have an IBC that everyone is perfectly happy with. And the members of IBC always need to know that they start from a perspective of some confidence deficit in some of the political players, because each political player, their position changes based on whether they're in government or in the opposition. You saw what happened between the last amendment to the IBC first schedule before the 2022 election and after. The same players, the people of Azimio, were happy with the process before 2022, and they were not happy with it after. Because now the president who does the final nomination is somebody who they are not collaborating with. So those things are likely to be there. And you see now Wiper are very concerned because they feel that their partner in Azimio, ODM, is in a handshake with government. And that the true opposition is Wiper. And yet it seems that it is the ODM side that is participating in the selection panel. So there'll always be an element of confidence deficit. And unfortunately, it is the parliamentarians who keep amending the first schedule and coming up with what they consider as the fairest method of appointing commissioners. So when the commissioners come in, they have to do what Yashpal Gai did when he started the process of constitution review in the 90s. They have to reach out to the other side. They have to give them a hearing. They have to build confidence in all the players. And not just the major political parties, because you have the smaller political parties. They don't like being called smaller political parties, but let's just say the ones with fewer members of parliament or with none. Maybe some have MCAs. They also are important players. They also need to be listened to. And then the other stakeholders, including people in the parliament and in the county assemblies, the executive, they also need to engage the judiciary, because the outcome of the work of IBC, the product of IBC's work, is normally tested in the judiciary. So you see, they have a lot of work to be done. And if they do it well, if they are men and women of integrity, they should manage to bridge a big part of the confidence deficit that may be there when they start their job.
Okay.
At least what we can say is that there has been a fair attempt to have a process of getting panelists that is, you could say, not tilted too heavily to one political alignment or the other.
Yeah, we talk about an IEBC formation of IEBC process as you speak right now, but now there is the absence of IEBC and what that does to the officers that be. Let's talk about Parliament. Now, we have a Parliament that is not fully constituted as by the law because of those who left the office to get into cabinet secretary positions, by elections that need to happen. What does this mean with regard to the formation of the National Assembly as per the law and the parliament itself being constitutionally in place?
Okay, so the constitution says that when a vacancy occurs in a parliamentary seat, it should be filled within 90 days. But it doesn't say that if the seat is not filled, then parliament ceases to be constitutional. So the vacancies have lasted, some for as long as a year because of either death or retirement or resignation. It doesn't make parliament unconstitutional. What happens is that the constitution provides certain minimum thresholds for parliament to function. So, for example, the quorum for most matters in the National Assembly is, say, 50 members of parliament. And for amendment of the constitution is 2/3 of all members. So if the National Assembly has 349 members, and maybe you have 5, 6, or 7 vacancies, it doesn't affect the ability of parliament to still reach the thresholds it requires to reach, but to undertake its job. So the only issue that is there is that the members or the constituents of those areas where you don't have a representative are denied representation in the course of ordinary parliamentary business.
So is that not then in and of itself unconstitutional? And then how do those members then seek reprieve? Because then the IEBC, because we've said that the IEBC still exists, because there are no commissioners or a chairperson doesn't mean that the functions don't continue. So is that not unconstitutional?
Yes.
I wouldn't say it's unconstitutional because parliaments all over the world, including our parliament, do face moments of vacancies. And it is so important for parliament to be able to keep operating even while you have temporary vacancies, that the importance of the public interest, the national interest, the importance of the whole country, we can't pause the work of such an important institution because there are some constituencies where the constituents are not represented. So those constituents are asked to bear with the processes and with time for the good of the whole country. Yeah, that's the idea.
But there's a small little matter here. When a constituency doesn't have an elected leader,
yes,
is it not the citizens' right to be represented?
It is their right, indeed.
So if that process is not carried out and they have no representation, could you then not say that a fundamental constitutional right is actually being abrogated?
Yes, there is a loss of a constitutional right. And the moment your member of parliament resigns or dies, you suffer that loss of representation. And I think the question of balancing between the rights of the people in that constituency and the rights of the people in all the other 300 plus constituencies, or 290 constituencies, because there are 290 elective constituencies, leads to that balance where you say you should be able to tolerate for a period of time non-representation, while the entire country at least continues to have a legislative arm to deal with important business. So the problem is when it stretches, when that period of non-representation stretches. And I think when the constitution was designed, it was anticipated that within 90 days, you should be able to fill the vacancy. Although we also know that there are times when you may not have an outcome from an electoral process and have to repeat an electoral process. So it was tolerated to have some vacancy. I think a vacancy of 3 to 6 months is tolerable, but one of 12 to 18 months is not tolerable. And that is why it is honestly a failure of our constitutional processes that we've not had an IBC for 12 months. But the Supreme Court was very firm. It said the reason why in the Constitution we have these constitutional commissions, which are have the joint role, they call the Chapter 15 commissions of safeguarding constitutionalism, is to avoid either the executive or the legislature, and I guess even the judiciary, from overwhelming and dominating the constitutional space. And the reason why the constitutional commissions were made independent is so that they can act even when their action is contrary to the short-term interest of some members of the executive or the legislature. So the only way IBC can act and get that confidence from Kenyans is when there are commissioners who have been appointed, they're independent, they are balanced, there is a regional balance, gender balance, all kinds of diversity, and they are the ones overseeing the work of the commission. Because if we didn't have that one and the secretariat became the one just running things, we'll go back to pre-1992, where the elections were being run by a department under the state law office. So it was actually, there was no independence, there was no level playing field. It was being controlled by the executive of the day.
Okay.
So the Supreme Court insisted that it's so important that the commissioners are in office for this kind of activities, because this is what Kenyans wanted. They didn't want a commission that becomes a part of the civil service under the control of those who control the civil service.
Okay,
Yes.
we're going to take a break, but we want to come back and really look at this issue. Of course, we've seen in the last 24 hours the opposition, as it were, crying foul in terms of the selection of the IEBC commissioners, and even the leader of the minority is saying that, you know what, we need an extension of this thing to be sure that there really is, for lack of a better word, no hanky-panky involved in all of this. So let's come back and look then at constitutionality when it then does hinge on selection, and that can you really run away from any kind of partisan selection. Charles Kanjama is our guest in the studio this morning, and we're looking at IEBC, we're looking at constitutionality, we're looking at timelines and thresholds, and essentially what it will portend going into the next period of civic education, of electioneering, etc., etc. 26 minutes to 9 o'clock. The Kenya's biggest conversation continues after this. We are not comfortable with this thing, and we see a position whereby fairness will not be maintained when it comes to the selection of the IEBC commissioners. Do they have a position here to hold with that statement?
For me, since I'm a lawyer, I think I will begin by recourse to the law. I think there has been a strict compliance with the law, including the amendments that were passed last year by Parliament in the process of composing the members of the selection panel. Second, when there is a dispute as to the interpretation of the law, we are meant to have recourse to the courts. And there have been court processes that have continued for the last 12 months, and they have concluded by giving some form of green light to the current process to continue. So when the law has been followed, when the courts have allowed the process to continue, I think members of the public and politicians are entitled to raise their concerns. But now they are not standing on a legal basis. They are standing on a socio-political basis. And so I think they can continue doing that because it is part of our fundamental rights and freedoms, assembly, protest, political rights, and Article 38. But the process needs to continue. Because now, as we were discussing before, the interests of more than 50 million Kenyans that require an IBC to be in office have to be weighed against also the concerns of these politicians. So unless they're able to get a court order, and right now I don't know whether a court would want to give a court order unless there's very clear and striking a violation of the law, then the process needs to continue. And we need to get the names. They need to be forwarded to the president. He needs to nominate some, take them to parliament. Parliament is mixed. In fact, we saw the other day that the court even declared that the majority party was not the party that of the president.
Yes.
So it means even in parliament, the people in opposition have a chance to influence the names that are presented there. They don't have to accept all the names. They could reject one or two if they think there are people who are not qualified or there's no effective balance. They are entitled to do that. But the constitutional and legal processes need to continue.
Now, Wakili, as this entire process continues now, we have the opposition who are at the moment raising their concerns with that, which brings the entire conversation on matters to do with an IEBC that would be formed and the need for the Republic, 55 million Kenyans, to trust that the commission that will be put in place will serve according to the constitution and aspirations of the office that they hold. Also, the fact to do with when they're getting in, there is the aspect of procurement process that need to take into place. So in terms of the commission that will be in place, to follow the law and to regain trust, just how much work do they have to ensure that any Kenyan will look at IEBC and say, they are working and we trust them?
I think the first breakdown of trust of IEBC after the last election was when there was this very public breakdown of unity between the commissioners. You remember the Cherera Four on one side holding a press conference at Serena Hotel, and then you had the other three led by the chair, Chebukati. And this issue actually was one of the matters for determination by the Supreme Court in the presidential election petition. And the Supreme Court gave some directive. It said, yes, it's the chairman who is the returning officer, but he has to work with his commissioners. So the issue of unity, I think, is the first and most fundamental thing that the incoming commission has to promote amongst themselves. And this is part of corporate governance. Unity doesn't mean uniformity. It doesn't mean you agree on everything, but it means you use your governance processes to air out your different views and eventually arrive at a harmonized, unified position. And if you find yourself in a minority, you accept the view of the majority. So that is clearly one issue of regaining trust. We need to see the commissioners coming from diverse backgrounds but speaking with one voice and under the stewardship of their chair. Number two, we saw how in the process for removal of the Cherera Four, when the tribunal was appointed, there was a lot of information coming out about attempts by people in the executive, including someone from military and elsewhere, to interfere. These were the allegations with the work of IEBC. Phone calls, visits, even at the 11th hour, while they were in the midst of their most important task. And so we want to see that whichever commission comes in is able to affirm and assert its independence from both the government of the day, the leadership of the day, led by President William Ruto, from the people in the opposition, Raila Odinga, Kalonzo Musyoka. They need to show independence. And we know that they are not going to come from a strange island. They are Kenyans. They already have existing connections with these parties and these people. But we'll need to see that when they are appointed as commissioners, they are able to develop a way of working and show it in public steps, whereby they affirm their independence from the various political players. And I think they'll even need to come up with some protocols. When do you receive calls from these players? When do you visit them in their homes?
Or should you?
In
Or
clubs?
should you?
Yes, or should you even?
Yes.
The first case scenario. This issue of coordinating between the Cherera Four and the others so that both of them are addressing the media at the same time. There's a lot of external interference. We don't want to see that anymore. But let me also say that IEBC cannot work on their own. They need support from Parliament. They need the budget that is appropriate for them to get the tools and the equipment and the resources they need to procure them for an effective election. And then the judiciary also needs to support them. One of the challenges in the last election was the volume of pre-electoral litigation, with decisions being made even in the last week before the elections. And of course, how do you prepare effectively for elections if you are determining, cases are being determined that have an impact on how you'll carry out the election, even on the last week, because this is what happened last time. So the IBC need also to work with the judiciary and agree on when will these decisions come, because you can't stop Kenyans from filing cases in the courts.
Sure, but you can actually have a judiciary who says, actually, you know what, because we understand.
Yes.
And sometimes it does appear in some cases as though the judiciary behaves like the abandoned stepchild in this corner of this marriage that is government, right?
Yes.
Without realizing not without realizing, sometimes almost appears as though it forgets the pivotal role that it
Yes.
plays in some of these things. So and when you talk about agreeing and saying
Yeah.
that, how about we say we will allow this process
Yes.
to be carried out in the manner in which it ought to, because then it looks as though if you agree to sit and hear these cases before, and people are supposed to be going towards an election, what role does the judiciary have in this process that we talk about to allow it flow seamlessly?
So of course the judiciary have a right to intervene when they see there's a violation of the constitution. And if there's a major violation of the constitution 2 days before the election, the judiciary will have to intervene. If IEBC make a decision that is clearly violating the constitution and of major implications, they have to intervene. But I think there'll need to be some kind of like protocol or guidance so that you avoid any single judge sitting high court in this particular part of the country or this other part of the country, just intervening in a very uncoordinated manner and causing a lot of pressure and chaos to IEBC in their organizational role. So I think there'll also need to be that discussion with the judiciary and maybe even some kind of rules so that only the very urgent and high impact cases are handled, say, in the last week. So you say, all these other matters, please deal with them, at least finish them 1 or 2 weeks, maybe 2 weeks before the election. And after that one, if you want to file the case, maybe it should go to a certain division of the court, and bench should be appointed very quickly that understands the need to resolve the matter. So there may be some very significant issues. For example, a presidential candidate might die a week and a half before the elections, and the constitution says something, IEBC gives a decision, say no, we'll ignore, we'll continue. So somebody goes to court, and you can't stop them from going to court in this kind of situations. But we are saying, can those other players support the work of IEBC? Parliament is meant to pass any amendments to electoral laws more than 12 months before the elections. So if they are passing the amendments in the last 6 months, how does IEBC plan? The treasury is meant to avail funds or financing well in advance. In fact, there is a fund for IEBC. But the treasury always says, no, we are struggling to get money. We can't give you all the money you need. It's like they are doling it out. So sometimes it appears as if it's doled out based on good behavior of IEBC.
If you behave in the way in which
Yes.
you should,
Yes.
then we'll give you the money.
So there are all these challenges. And even for us as the ordinary Kenyans, when we are asked to go and register to vote, can we go early and not expect extension of the deadlines of registration?
No, it makes it so much more fun. Come on, Wakili, if you say the deadline is tomorrow at 12, it's necessary that we go tomorrow at 2.
Tomorrow there are long queues because we are always last minute Kenyan. So it's very difficult whereby we expect those we appoint into positions will not be last minute Kenyans while the rest of us are last minute citizens.
Is it possible to have this process kick-started, formulated and kick-started without political participation?
Very difficult.
Not impossible.
I don't think it would be appropriate because to start such a process which involves political players, and yet Article 10 of our Constitution talks about participation of the people. So who are the people that are meant to participate in all these governance processes? First is the political players, because they are the people who are involved and affected by those decisions. So they have to be given an opportunity at every stage to participate. But where I agree with you, City, is that you can have a timeline or a calendar and you go ahead with it. Those who want to jump onto the bus, they jump. Those who don't want to jump, the bus starts moving and they'll get in when they want to. But you have to always find a way of getting them to have an opportunity to engage. It's part of confidence building.
Okay.
What protection do IEBC commissioners have? Many of these constitutional offices have tenure.
Yes.
So you can't wake up in the morning and tell somebody go home.
Yes.
Do IEBC commissioners have the same tenure?
Yeah, they have a 6-year term. It's a 1 term, not renewable. And they can only be removed by the formation of a tribunal, like the one that was formed to remove the Cherera 4. And it can only be for serious constitutional grounds like breach of the constitution, gross misconduct, inability to perform their job. So they have the same protection that other state officers who have been given security of tenure have. So they can do their job in confidence that they have security of tenure, and it's only a serious misconduct that will trigger the process of removal.
There's a little detail of political, not interference, but participation.
Yes.
Because it is strong to the point where even appointments are influenced.
Yes.
It is strong to the point where they are appointed with sometimes allegedly specific instructions.
Yes.
So the independence, even at that point, one has to question whether it actually exists or not. So we then have a situation which, even before it starts,
Yes.
is fraught with problems, because there will be differences. Because if the electoral process is very directly infused with political intent, then it stands to reason that you can't really be independent, can you?
You're actually right. One of the challenges of IEBC is to affirm and manifest their independence. You know, there are many constitutional commissions in Chapter 15, but none of the others is called independent.
Yes.
The others are given other names, but the word independent does not appear. And there's a very good reason why the word independent is the first word in the name of IEBC. Because the framers of the Constitution and Kenyans were saying that the most important quality of IEBC be independent of all these politicians who are competing for power, so that you can be a neutral and objective arbiter or referee between them. And you are right that because the people who are involved in the process of appointment, the president, after the selection panel, the president selects from these two who will become the chair, from the 9 who are the 6. Parliament comes in, it asks them various questions. There is a risk. Unfortunately, we've not found a better way of setting up the IEBC, because all the other ways we had before were worse. So this is like our best compromise of a system that involves the executive, the legislature, and where the judiciary can intervene if there is a challenge. So it's like the 3 arms of government are given a bit of a say. And hopefully once the people come in, because they are now given that independence and security of tenure, even if the person was 7 years ago a member of this political party or the other, once they now get that independence, they're expected to rise up to the occasion and act in accordance with the constitutional and statutory requirements.
Commissioners, very clearly, what is their role in the commission? And I'm going to ask the second question, because then I guess your answer to the first one would then bleed into that. And based on that, should commissioners be at any time or in any position, sitting down to whatever it may be, a coffee, a meeting with anybody in political spheres, for example, members, chairpersons of a political party, secretary generals? Remember what we talked about, perception and optics.
Yes.
Very important in this whole process.
Yes.
What's the role of a commission, and why, in any reason, would they be seen frolicking with such?
Okay, I'll try to answer the 2 questions. First, the commissioners are full-time under the IEBC Act. There are some constitutional commissions like Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission where commissioners are part-time. And when you are part-time, your role is mainly like a board of a company or an organization. You just sit in meetings, you make decisions, and the implementation of the policy is by the secretariat. When you are full-time, the expectation of the law and the constitution is that you have a governance role, but you also play a closer oversight role over the work of the commission. So the IEBC commissioners, they meet, sometimes they'll meet once, maybe a fortnight. As they are doing important assignments, they will meet even weekly. In the run-up to the general election or boundary delimitation, they will meet even more than once a week. They sit in committees also. They are assigned certain responsibilities. For example, the responsibilities may be to oversight the electoral or boundary process based on regions, or it may be functional oversight. So there is a secretariat member maybe who is in charge of voter registration,
Okay.
and there is a commissioner who's meant to oversight that voter registration.
Okay.
So they are not like managers of the organization. It's a mix between the traditional governance role, but also with some measure of oversight, so that they are ensured, or they are assured that the work of the commission is going on as it should. In terms of whether they should be interacting with stakeholders, they have to get a balance. When you are too aloof from the people that you serve,
Yes.
you get into an ivory tower. You don't even know the problems and the challenges they're having. You make decisions that have not listened to the people on the ground. So there's a danger of being too aloof, know it all. They want to come up with all the solutions instead of allowing people to organically propose solutions. On the other hand, you could end up being a wheeler dealer, because in the process of listening to the people on the ground, they are calling you, they are making all kinds of improper offers and recommendations, and this is the way our country is. So of course they'll need to have a statement of independence, and even maybe come up with a code of conduct as the commissioners on the do's and don'ts. I am a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators, and I would say arbitration is one field where they have thought very closely on the question of independence. And they have certain principles of independence. You have to disclose. That's one of the ways of dealing with threats to independence. There has to be a measure of disclosure. You have to avoid engaging one party on the side in the absence of the other party. Normally in the first meeting, we tell the two parties, anytime you want to talk to me, please copy the other party. If it is a meeting, come in, both of you. So you try and avoid some of the very unstructured situations where people start talking to you personally, and then there's a perception of influence. And probably the IEBC commissioners will have to borrow from this approach to independence that, say, arbitrators take when they are resolving disputes.
Wakili, do we have Kenyans who are actually able to perform independently outside the judiciary? One sees in the judiciary individuals coming out and actually clearly demonstrating independence, but aside from the judiciary.
The truth, City, is that even in the judiciary, as lawyers, we sometimes get concerned, because even the independence in the judiciary sometimes breaks down. And there's no sector where you have Kenyans where sometimes phone calls might not be made to someone. Of course, the judiciary, they are trained and they have an infrastructure that can encourage them to be independent.
Right.
And so you are right that IEBC can also learn from the judiciary in terms of how does the judiciary maintain its independence. Can we adopt similar kind of approaches? But I remember one thing that I really liked about former Chief Justice Willie Mutunga, because before Chief Justice Willie Mutunga, the judiciary's desire for independence had reached a point where they were completely separate from the bar. They're almost like on an ivory tower. And Willie Mutunga even said, even the architecture of the courtroom, where the judge is seated on a high pedestal with
And
a
the rest
bar
of
and
you.
the people are down there. Let's change it. He said, let's have court users committees. The judiciary needs to listen to court users and bar bench committees. We set them up. At that time, I was the chair of the Nairobi branch of the Law Society. We set up bar bench committees. So they are structured, but there's a method of engaging between the judiciary and the court users. Because you need this. There are certain issues that don't have to escalate to Judicial Service Commission if you resolve them at a certain level. So IBC would need to use a similar approach whereby they don't become like an ivory tower. They're just there aloof. No, you can't call me, you can't talk to me. But
After
they can
all,
come
we're
up
seeing
with
an
rules
election.
structured. For example, the Political Parties Liaison Committee is a fantastic organ for engaging with IBC. They could find other structured ways of engaging
with people.
including even with the leaders of political parties.
Indeed.
But do it in a way that cultivates that sense of objectivity and impartiality
amongst the people. Charles Kanjama, I must say that I hate to let you go, but we have to. Time doesn't always allow, but this has been great to then be able to have a further understanding. And it is our hope that, along the tenets of which you have spoken today, that things will actually be followed. But it's good to get insights. And thank you for joining in on this conversation.
My
today.
pleasure.
Asante Sana. Good morning, 9 a.m.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.